Hello, welcome to AP Sources Simplified. Today we're looking at a core document for the Second Wave of Feminism called The Feminine Mystique, written by Betty Friedan. Before looking at the key points of the document, let's take a look at the context. During World War II, many women took on new roles in the economy and society, including work in heavy industry and significant amount of participation in the armed forces. And during the war, these roles for women were emphasized as a positive development by the U.S. government. However, after the war ended and throughout the 1950s, the traditional cult of domesticity came back to dominate. During the 1950s, as the economy boomed, suburbs sprung up across the country, and the ideal for women was reinforced by society and media was to aspire to being a housewife, in which a woman would focus her energies on raising her children, keep a clean and tidy house, and please her husband. Another big development during the 1950s that stretched into the 60s was the civil rights movement. The movement also inspired other rights movements, including the feminist. However, it should be noted that women for many years have been criticizing the traditional roles prescribed towards them. As an example, Edith Stern, another famous feminist, wrote in a magazine in 1949 a work entitled Women Are Household Slaves, which would have many of the same critiques as Betty Friedan. And now speaking of our author, Betty Friedan, she had done some research on the happiness, or lack thereof, of former college classmates, and she found many of them to be unhappy as a housewife. This would inspire Friedan to formulate many thoughts around the state of women in America, and write the book, The Feminine Mystique, which would go on to sell millions of copies, and be a core document in the second wave of feminism. Turning to the key points of the feminine mystique, Betty Friedan starts out by discussing, quote, the problem that has no name, which is the widespread unhappiness felt by women in the 1950s and early 60s. Friedan says that women have seen despair as an individual's issue and problem, but she argues that it is actually a societal problem. It is the way society is set up that is causing unhappiness. Next, Friedan accurately states that the media is dominated by men who reinforce the happy housewife role for women. This can be seen in types of popular TV and radio shows, advertisements aimed at women, and magazines. In this time period, the psychology of Sigmund Freud was incredibly popular, and Freud had seen women as childlike and meant for housewifery, and laws and customs have developed to reinforce this assumption. However, Friedan argues that this is not a biological fact. The feminine mystique also criticizes the popular social science theory of functionalism, which says that women were confined to their societal roles because that is how society functions the best. Friedan goes on to criticize various aspects of education that reinforce traditional gender roles, and argues that a mother's lack of fulfillment spreads to her children and makes them more miserable. So an unhappy mother equals an unhappy household. So then, what are Friedan's prescriptions to improve the situation? First, she says that we should not view being a housewife as a career goal. Second, women should seek out fulfillment through more than just her marriage and children. And third, women should find meaningful work that utilizes their mental capacity. However, Friedan warns that women who do try her prescriptions will receive pushback from society, but they must strive forward with education and meaningful work, being the answer to not becoming trapped in an unhappy life. Now, taking a look at Friedan's intentions, she presents herself as a housewife, or from the point of view of a housewife. However, she was involved in radical leftist politics up to this point in her life. Her audience is to be a voice for women upset with their traditional roles and help them recognize that they are not alone and it is not their fault that they feel unfulfilled. And the feminine mystique's purpose is to challenge and agitate for change in traditional gender roles and open up opportunities for women. Moving on to who would agree and disagree with the feminine mystique. Fellow feminists and possibly others in civil rights movements would agree. However, that may not always be the case, as women will be directed towards backseat roles in anti-war and other rights movements. More conservative and traditional women would disagree with Friedan and say they are perfectly happy as housewives. One notable dissenter with Friedan that is very important to APUSH is Phyllis Schlafly. and her Stop Equal Rights Amendment movement. But more on her and that movement in another video. Finally, let's take a look at the legacy of the document. The Feminine Mystique is seen as a core document of the second wave of feminism, lasting from the 1960s to the 1980s. Congress would actually convene a committee to look at gender inequality, and from it would pass the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which requires that men and women be given equal pay for equal work in the same establishment. A few years after the publication of the Feminine Mystique, the National Organization for Women, also known as NOW, forms with Friedan as a founding member. They demand the removal of all barriers in equality for women, and Friedan and the Feminine Mystique will also experience some criticism from various viewpoints. But one notable one is the focus of the book seemingly solely on middle-class white women dealing with suburbanization. Okay, that does it for Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique. If you liked the video, please click that like button, share with your friends and classmates, and subscribe to the channel.